Humor helps us when we're feeling stuck. It is an alternate path. It's not necessarily the light at the end of the tunnel, it's the light at the beginning of the tunnel to let you know a tunnel is available for you to take rather than the one that you're hyper focused on.
Welcome to Season of Stuck, the podcast that takes a deep dive into the all too human experience of feeling stuck. I'm your host, Deanna deBara, and on this podcast, we explore all things stuck. How and why stuckness happens, what it feels like, how to learn and grow from it, and ultimately, how to get unstuck and move forward in an authentic, empowered way. If you are looking for insights, support, and community as you make your journey from stuck to unstuck, you're in the right place. Now, let's jump into today's episode. Hello. Welcome to another episode of Season of Stuck. I'm your host, Deanna. I hope you're having a fantastic week. If this is your first time listening, welcome. And if this is your second or fourth or 10th time listening or anything in between, welcome back. I can't tell you enough how much I appreciate you being here and supporting the show. Hopefully, while you're here, you will find something that feels helpful or supportive as you make your journey from stuck to unstuck. Or, speaking to today's topic, something that makes you laugh. Now, I know that humor probably isn't the first thing you think of when you think of stuckness. Being stuck definitely doesn't feel very humorous, especially when you're in the thick of it. But the truth is, humor can be a really impactful tool for healing. It can help you change your perspective on painful experiences or situations or stories, and ultimately help you get unstuck. For example, I have a huge catalog of stories from when I was drinking that I used to feel very ashamed of and embarrassed by. And I often felt stuck in that shame and embarrassment. But today, I can look back at many of those stories and see the humor in them, like the Jurassic Park story, which didn't exactly make me laugh at the time, but today I find hilarious. So, I had just gone through a bad breakup. I was living on my own in a kind of depressing little studio house apartment. And like most people in the early to mid 2000s, I had gotten cable when I moved in. But here is a fun fact about me. When you put alcohol in my system, any sense of financial responsibility just goes out the window. And so I inevitably fell behind on my cable payments, and eventually my cable was shut off. And all I had in the apartment was one DVD copy of Jurassic Park that I had gotten from the library, which I watched every night for months because I was too drunk to figure out how to pay my bill and get the cable turned back on, or even to go to the library and get another DVD. At the time, this felt like the most embarrassing thing in the world. At 25, I couldn't get it together enough to get the cable on. Forget about it. I couldn't get it together enough to get myself to the library to rent a DVD. But now, when I look back at that time, me wasted on my couch watching Jurassic Park for like 67 consecutive nights, I can't help but laugh because it's funny. It's also very sad that that's where I was in my life and that's what was going on, but also funny. And it's not just drinking. The years I was bullied, time spent in challenging relationships, mistakes I've made, being able to find humor in the hard and painful parts of my past has helped me make sense of so many different types of stuckness that I've experienced in my life. It's helped me own my stories, process hard emotions, and move on from painful past experiences. And being able to laugh at myself and my life has made me a happier, stronger person. Humor has not only helped me process and make sense of my past, which of course has been key to getting unstuck, but it's also helped me get unstuck from sticky moments in my day to day. For example, if I'm having an argument with my husband, there is a word either one of us can say that signals to the other person that we need to shut down the argument and take some space to cool down. This is a very effective tool in keeping arguments from escalating. And it's even more effective because we chose a word that's related to a personal joke between us. And so whenever one of us says it, even if we're really mad, we can't help but laugh. And that laughter can dissipate the tension and make the disagreement easier to resolve. I wanted to know more about how humor can help us heal, grow, and move away from stuckness. And that is what brought me to today's guest. Talia Bombola is a therapist, life and relationship coach, and the host of the Heal Through Humor podcast. During our conversation, Talia and I take a deep dive into how humor can help you go from stuck to unstuck, including what humor does to the brain and how that relates to stuckness, the difference between using humor as a healthy way to cope and using humor as a way to avoid or deflect, and why being able to laugh at the world and at yourself, even when things are hard, is such a helpful supportive skill, and how to strengthen that skill and get unstuck in the process. Let's jump into my conversation with Talia. Talia, welcome to Season of Stuck. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. We were just chatting off air how seamlessly it all came. We wouldn't get stuck at all having this happen. So I'm very much so looking forward to today's conversation.
I feel like when things start off on a seamless note, it just sets the tone for a seamless experience, which I always appreciate.
Yes, I agree.
I'm so excited to jump into this topic in particular. Humor and laughter, as a result of humor, has been like a very integral part of my ability to make sense of things, to get through tough times, and ultimately support myself as I get from a stuck place to an unstuck place. So I'm so excited to pick your brain and understand kind of why that is. So, I guess to kick things off, I'd love if you could introduce yourself to listeners, tell us a little bit about how you got into the therapy world and how you decided to infuse humor into your work.
Sure. So I think to best respond, I will answer your question backwards. So not at all the structure you gave. I love humor and it's always been a part of my life. And I get that from watching my parents interact with, which in some ways does connect to why I became a therapist, but we'll get to that later. I'll bury the lead now, actually. So when we're looking at humor, for me, when I look at it in my life, it was always something that my dad tried to infuse with us. Like anything that we would come to with like all the stress and whatever, his first question would be like, did somebody die? And I'm like, what? No. And he's like, then why are you panicking? And I'm like, oh, I guess that's like a fair point. Like it was good perspective. So I personally had that experience of having humor be kind of deflating that stress balloon that was getting inflated by probably my own overthinking most of the time. And also watching my dad try to like lighten my mom up and joke with her because she's a very serious, like methodical person. And obviously over 30 something, 40 years almost they've been together. They're definitely different. He's a little more serious. She's a little bit more lighthearted. So watching how it can transform an entire system, really my own family system, allowed me to understand how important it is to have in your life. And this is where my own experience as a therapist comes in. As most therapists, we have our own journey with our own therapy before we become a therapist. Growing up at a certain point, I think it was around middle school, I started to get bullied. And I started my therapy to help me with coping with being bullied and feeling outcast. And it's not necessarily that therapist used humor, but she gave me that hour or two a week. Some weeks that felt like that was the only time really worth living, especially in middle school, because everything's so intense and you're feeling everything for the first time. So of course it's the end of the world when something happens. And she allowed me to have a break from the seriousness, from the intensity. So both of those things coming together, the humor and my own personal experience, allowed me to understand from the client position how I would want a client to feel when I was in the therapist position. So my own experience informed me to want to be, I was like, this could be a job. You mean I can sit across from people and help them feel with whatever they're going through so much better about their lives? Sign me up. Obviously, it's a very long process. It wasn't just like as quickly as this podcast came together. It was more arduous than that. And along the way, humor is what helped me. And I love stand-up. I've taken some classes in it to study it. I've read some books on it. Most of the time people say don't do, like anybody truly in stand-up's like, oh, that's not real stand-up. And it's like, it's how I learn. I love learning. So that was my own experience with it. And it helped me to understand how humor for myself and for my clients, for me, it comes naturally. The wit, the thinking 10 steps ahead, the connecting it to, what they said at the end to this, it's all keeping track. All of that does apply also in stand-up. And it applies when you're thinking about humor and comedy. What makes something funny is it's unexpected, it's oddly personal, it's oddly relatable, it's well-timed. There's so much that goes into stand-up that also goes into therapy as well. And in my view, they're very similar. So when I'm thought to bring humor into therapy, it really helped clients to not feel like it was the end of the world, even though sometimes their world was collapsing around them. At least we can have a laugh. And that's why one of my podcasts, Heal Through Humor, is the way that it is and the name that it is, because I do think it can be very healing, both personally and professionally.
I am so curious to know. So I have been in therapy for a long time, for pretty much my entire adult life.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Good.
I will take that. Congratulations. It does feel like something that has been just so beneficial in my life in so many ways. I also was bullied a lot as a kid, and that can really, kind of mess with your self-esteem and self-image and how you show up in the world. So therapy has been such a great tool, and I have been fortunate to have some like A plus 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 therapists. But I have never had that experience of like humor in a session.
Mm,
I will sometimes like crack a joke or like say something self-deprecating, which
yes.
generally has not been well received in therapy.
They're like, You're like,
Hmm,
that was funny. Can we try that
exactly.
again where you laugh? That was really funny. Yeah.
Yeah, what does that mean? What are you really saying? Kind of like that path.
Yep.
So, I'm so curious, how do you as a therapist infuse humor into the therapy process and bring that not only comedic talent but comedic appreciation and that
Yes.
healing through humor into the work that you do with clients?
Yeah, so I would say at least one of three ways that I try to include it. I take the temperature of the room because I work with individuals and I work with couples, families as well, but that's more of an art. I mean, therapy is an art. That's really an art form when you use humor with families because you don't always know what type of humor. Every family has their own sense of humor, whether it's completely absent or present in some ways. I always keep that in mind. It's more of an art. So with individuals and couples, the first way that I try to infuse it is I'm a very active therapist. So I will ask questions. I will help to unpack. I will try to connect, the present to the past because my training is in psychodynamic and psychoanalytic work. A lot of it is based in, well, this probably happened to you in childhood. How did you frame it then? So I let the client, or I create space rather for the client to bring in the material they want to process. That's the art part, is like listening for it. And I'm like, okay, that's that. Or they'll make a joke and I'll try to make it a humorous connection to something else they've brought up. I'm like, oh, well, yeah, because that would make you exactly like your mom. And obviously it doesn't always land, but I think at this many years in of both trying humor, like having that as a craft and having therapy as a craft, it's mostly well timed to that they crack a smile, they laugh. That's one way, is I initiate the humor by making a connection. The second way is like you do, they try to land the joke, or you can kind of see them making a bid for like, am I getting an A in therapy? And I will laugh. And sometimes I will laugh ahead of where they're going because I can already see like where it's lining up for, or where it's lining up to. So I will initiate them laughing, I will receive them laughing, and I will laugh with them. And then the third version, these are not the only three, but usually these top three, the third version is creating an alternate humorous view together. So we're co-creating it in a way that they can look back and laugh. An example I can give is years and years ago, I was working with a couple and they were having what we call a gridlocked issue. They really couldn't move past this concern about the fear of dental work was the theme of what was going on. And we were going through it for many sessions. And by the end of one of the sessions, we had kind of softened. We understood where the thread came from both of their childhoods. It was deeper. It's always deeper than what they bring in. And I laughed and I said, you want to know what I just realized? And they're like, what? Like waiting for this big revelation. I said, most issues go with us till we die if we're gridlocked. The good news is that over time, your teeth eventually fall out and you might need dentures. So this topic is really going to be a moot point in 40 years. And they, like you, lost it. And they realized like, oh, it's really not that important. Like this specifically, like the meta of it is not important, but also the specific topic will be moot. So why are we even spending so much time on it? So that's like one example of co-creating it together where they have the buy-in, they're waiting for the insight. And sometimes the humor and being able to laugh at yourself is the insight. It's not always this deep awareness. It's sometimes like, oh my gosh, you're right. Like, what am I doing? Like, being able to laugh at yourself is the most healing because it puts it in perspective.
That adds so much levity to the situation because
Yes.
sometimes, even when I'm in it, I know that the reason that I'm upset or stressed or frustrated is like, for lack of a better word, dumb. Like you said, like, is this really going to matter down the line? But like, I can't unstick myself from that feeling of frustration or sadness or anger or whatever
Yes.
it is.
Yes.
And sometimes just like that little bit of levity that can be added to the situation, it feels like an exhale. Like, oh, I can like
Mm-hmm.
view this as what it is. I don't have to attach all of this meaning to what's happening, and I can just kind of laugh it off a little bit.
And it doesn't mean that what you're going through isn't worth going through, doesn't mean that it isn't serious or in proportion to your own priorities very important. It's more, I learned from that same couple, one of the stories was holding a balloon. It related in some way, and the balloon popped eventually at the end of the day, the person that was holding it. And I said, "How did you feel when it popped?" And I was expecting, oh, worried because of whatever pressure it was at the time. And the person was like, "I felt so relieved. I didn't have to like hold this and be responsible for it anymore." And I liken that to how humor can alleviate a lot of the tension we feel. It doesn't get rid of the problem. It can alleviate the tension around the problem. Your nervous system and your biochemistry changes when you're laughing, when you're in a good mood, when you're feeling happy. We also know this from experiments where you practice smiling in the mirror, and it actually does have an impact on your mood, both your felt sense of your mood and your external expression of your mood, because you're tricking your brain. So there's like a little bit of the biohacking involved. And for the most part, it's to take the air out of the balloon or pop the tension balloon around whatever issue you're going through so you can have a different perspective and hopefully tackle it from a different angle or understand with empathy and humor and grace, this is what it is. I am who I am as a person. I may as well laugh it off, not diminish it, but laugh it off and not make it the most serious thing about myself or the most serious pressing issue to tackle.
So there's like a physiological or like biological brain related component as to how humor can help us move through these hard times.
Yes. And for people to think back to like how much emotions, so emotions are energy in motion and they're also informants. So they're not designed to like run the whole infrastructure. If you think of it that way, like they're not the police chief, so to speak, or the head detective. They're simply an informant from one part of you to another part of you. And when you think about how certain emotions impact us, I could ask you to think of I tell this to my students when I taught this intro to psych. Think of your happiest memory. People can think of some, they're, laughing, smiling. And then I would switch, because Jedi mind tricks, to like think of your most shameful memory. And without fail, most every student, once they landed on it, would look down and kind of go inward. That's the response to shame. So we know emotions cause very specific responses, both mentally, physically, and emotionally. That's the same with humor. So I like to look at humor, not necessarily, it's not a specific emotion, but I think it's a cousin of happiness and how happiness feels in our body when we have a positive outlook, when we're able to be flexible with our thinking instead of rigid, when we feel lighter rather than this tension around what we're going through, we're able to make better decisions. So if you put yourself biochemically in that more happy or lighthearted position, it doesn't, again, take away from your problems. It puts you in a better physical, metaphysical space to go through it in a different way rather than being this super serious, they have no sense of humor. I've cracked some of the toughest of clients, especially the older generations. They're like, "You can't make me laugh." I'm like, "Bet." And a few sessions in, guess who gets the last laugh?
Oh, that must feel so satisfying when someone's like, "You're not going to make me laugh." And you're like, "Challenge accepted."
Yep. Or the ones who are like, "You're not going to make me cry." And I'm like, technically, no, but inadvertently, you will cry in here. Just give it time. The tissues are there for a reason, but I'm going to be here for you.
Yep. There's going to be some tears and some laughter. So I love the way that you framed humor as like not necessarily an emotion, but like this emotional experience that causes certain
Right.
reactions in our body and our feelings. And I think about stuckness similarly, right? So, like, stuck isn't necessarily an emotion, but it is an emotional space that has certain feelings and physical experiences attached to it. It feels heavy, it feels stagnant, it feels unmotivating, it can feel hopeless, all of these things. So, in thinking about stuckness from that perspective, like, why is humor such an effective antidote? Like, why does humor help us so much when we're feeling like we're stuck?
In my view, humor helps us when we're feeling stuck. It is an alternate path. It's not necessarily the light at the end of the tunnel, it's the light at the beginning of the tunnel to let you know a tunnel is available for you to take rather than the one that you're hyper focused on. So many people have blinders on for their life and what they're going through. It's natural. Those are the grooves that are carved out over however many decades that we've been alive. And that does come from how we're raised. So when we're raised in an environment where everything is serious, it's business as usual, it's logical, there's no room for those silly emotions, right? Very generational of like, I'll give you something to cry about if you don't have a feeling, right? One of my favorite memes, I like memes and reels as humor too. And it's like, I have depression, or as my father puts it, no, you don't. So there's this feeling of emotions that are too much or emotions that are too intense to process also don't have like a relationship with humor. So that can leave people feeling stuck and feeling like this is all I'm ever going to have. When you look at infusing humor and having it be that beginning light at the, this is where I could go down, it allows people to be more creative, and it puts you in more of a creative mind space rather than your logic brain. So a lot of people are stuck because they're so stuck in logic. The clients I work with are either not as much anymore, but they're very stuck in emotion and they don't see the logic, or they don't see that they have an option in what they're going through. They feel like they will be constantly in the victim position, even though sometimes they're putting themselves there. That could be a whole other discussion. And they don't see the levity in the situation. I'm not talking about being an actual victim, but they're like colluding with whatever the system is in their family or their friends. And they're like, woe is me. And I'm like, but you're doing this to yourself in some ways. Like, what do you gain from that? Then when we're exploring that, that's where we can have a laugh. So there's an experience of being unstuck because you have a different perspective, because you're feeling like you're in a more creative mind state, and you can look at things truly with a different lens now that you know it's not the end of the world. And when you feel stuck, it's hard to access humor, because a lot of people, at least that I've talked to, have said it feels like I'm invalidating or diminishing what I'm actually going through if I laugh. It's very similar with grief. People are like, well, I can't go out to this lunch and act fine if I'm grieving. And I said, well, I get what that means, that it would look externally, but if that's what you really want, why wouldn't you do it? And we spend some time exploring that. How much of it is the external world and your translation of what you think it would view you as, instead of your deep desire? If you want to laugh, or if you want to cope by looking at silly memories, or when I work with grieving clients, humor is especially important, because it's like, let's talk about your funniest memories. It's a way to honor that person's memory. It's a way to still keep them alive in a way that doesn't feel as sad and heavy, or that it's only allowed to be sad and heavy. There can also be humor and light, and looking at, again, funny memories, funny pictures is a great way to honor that. And you can do that while everyone's still alive, and put things in perspective to not stay stuck in what most often people feel like stress or negative emotion.
Mm-hmm. And I'll speak for myself, but for me, stuck can feel like a very all-encompassing type of experience. Like, I'm so stuck that, similar to what you said, I can't even see that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, let alone how to get to that light. So it sounds like tapping into humor during those experiences almost like allows you to zoom out and see the bigger picture of what's going on. And like, maybe you're in the center and you're feeling stuck, but there's actually this whole big world around you. And it's like, really, not that it's not a big deal, but like, we can find a little humor in that and use that to create that light at the end of the tunnel and follow it and get out of our stuckness.
Yeah. When humor is able to be in the room with all the other emotions and the primary experience, especially in therapy, that we're trying to work through, we also learn how to compartmentalize what is going on in our life, and again, prioritize it. So when clients walk in the room, their top priority is what they want to process in therapy, and if that's come up for them in between sessions. When they're out in their regular world, or at work, or at home, what they talk about in therapy still exists inside them. It may not be a priority. However, the caveat, you will experience the content you bring into therapy in the rest of your life. That's how it works, right? That's how therapy functions for the most part. So when you're looking at the rest of the world, the perspective shift that you mentioned, now you can bring the humor that you had in therapy to the rest of it, and you can laugh at yourself without invalidating or diminishing the importance when that event that you're processing in therapy comes up in your life. And it's like, oh, there's that thing I do. Like, oh my gosh, this is hysterical. Or I have clients be like, imagine that you're on a reality show and that people are filming you, and how do you want to portray or be seen? And sometimes they're like, oh my God, if the cameraman were there today, like that would have been so embarrassing. Like, they can then bring the humor into their everyday life. And so they're not only getting unstuck in sessions, they're getting unstuck in between sessions. Overall, generally their mood starts to improve.
There are so many different ways to go from stuck to unstuck. But one of the most productive, learning. Learning something new can help you expand your skill set and find new interest, and in the process, help you get unstuck. And if you want to learn something new, you will definitely want to check out Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community that offers thousands of classes designed to help you learn, grow, and tap into your creativity, all of which can help you make the journey from stuck to unstuck. And right now, Skillshare is offering a free month to new members. If you want to access Skillshare's entire library of classes and get the education and instruction you need to shake off the stuckness, just visit seasonofstuck.com/Skillshare and sign up for your free trial today. Again, that's seasonofstuck.com/Skillshare. I think you touched on a really important point, which is that when you're bringing humor into these situations, it's in a way that allows us to laugh at ourselves in like a loving, kind way that doesn't diminish or deprioritize or trivialize the things that we're experiencing. And then I think there's a flip side of that coin, at least for me. I sometimes can use humor as a way to deflect or distance myself. So, for example, if there's something that I maybe feel insecure about, I might make a joke about it in order to not feel that vulnerability of someone seeing my insecurity. So, I'm curious from your experience working in therapy and bringing humor into the room, like, how can we bring humor to the challenges that we struggle with, including when we're feeling stuck, in a way that's healthy and supportive and not like as a defense mechanism or a deflection or a way to separate ourselves from what we're actually feeling?
Yeah, I think it's a good thing that we are discussing this because many people will utilize self-deprecating humor as a way to cope. And then when we talk about humor in therapy, they're like, "No, but I am using humor." I'm like, "But you're not using it for growth. You're using it for dissociation, for avoidance, for lack of a better word, like almost like anti-growth. Like you're using it to keep yourself in a stuck place and be self-deprecating and diminish what you are working on or keep you stuck in those negative emotional cycles." And that is well-placed self-deprecating humor for the purposes of others, like on stand-up or on the stage on stand-up. That's different. That's not what we're talking about. That has its place and can be funny because it shows insight, self-awareness, the ability to call oneself out, as long as that is not causing negative sentiment override or negative cycles of how you view yourself in the world from that moment that you're using it forward. Then if you're doing that, that's fine. If you're doing it for the other way of it's uncomfortable to be around. I don't know if you've been around people who use self-deprecating humor and you can tell it's because they don't love themselves or like themselves. And you're like, ew, like, why are you being so hard on yourself? Or like, you just said that in public, right? Like, and I'm not, I'm a therapist by trade. I'm not therapist all the time. So I have my normal life that I'm like, you probably should be in therapy. And I'm not saying it in a dismissive way. I'm saying it in like, that's not a healthy way to think about yourself. Or like, well, yeah, nobody will ever love me because I'm such an asshole. And it's like, okay, also, if you know that you are, then why don't you work on it? Like there's two ways the self-deprecating humor can be translated, if you will. So when I hear people that utilize self-deprecating humor, I try to uncover, what is it about? Did someone teach you that as a way to cope? Did you learn that was the way to cope to try to fit in when you felt outcast? And has it gone so far that it's starting to impact your self-esteem and self-worth? And usually when we arrive at the end of that, clients can understand, oh, that's not a healthy way. Or if I'm using humor to dismiss, a very common with couples that they use very poorly timed humor and it'll come off as dismissive, invalidating, defensive, or some other term in psychology, and their partner can't appreciate the levity because it isn't levity. It feels like bullying. It feels like picking on. It feels like dismissing. It's about the timing. Timing is everything with humor. You can ask people who do stand up or not. Timing is everything. If you don't say the joke at the right tone and cadence, it falls flat. The audience won't laugh. It's an art and a science, much like therapy is, that when we're looking at not including self-deprecating humor, what are you defending against? Why are you using that? Or why are you using like other deprecating humor to put that person in a one down position so you can feel superior to them? What's that about? So I do interrupt when people are using humor, quote unquote, incorrectly or to the detriment of themselves or others. And that's where I think limits need to be placed also for the internal self. If you're listening to this and you're not in your own therapy, you can take a look and do an inventory of your life. Do I use self-deprecating humor to cover up what I really need to be working on? Or do I use self-deprecating humor as a way to, we can all have a laugh, make myself human on par with other people, and kind of disclose in a funny way some things I don't like about myself? That's a healthy outlet. Using it for not that is not a healthy outlet.
100%. And I'm so glad that you brought up the deprecating humor towards others. So, as I mentioned earlier, I know this is your story too. I was bullied a lot as a kid, and I was bullied about things that are just kind of like fundamental about me and my personality. And so, as an adult, teasing to me, even when people think it's funny or good hearted, feels not good and like not okay. And for a long time, I would just talk myself down from that of like, oh, like, they're just trying to be funny or sarcastic and it's fine. And I finally reached a point, thank you, therapy, where it's just a boundary that I have with people in my life where all of my friends and my family members know I don't like to be teased. So you might think that you're being funny, but what it feels like for me is that you're putting me down. So if there's something you need to address with me, address it with me directly, but don't nitpick things about my personality and make jokes out of them because to me, it's not funny.
Yeah. And for people who have a history with other deprecating humor, we are hypersensitive to if the type of humor we're currently experiencing is what we experienced in the past. We're very hyper, like our trauma spidey senses are going, like, is this person going to hurt me the way that I've been hurt before? And we are more apt, even if we've gone to therapy, it's part of our biochemistry. We're more apt to be like defensive, like on the defensive, like, where is this going? And when we allow ourselves that second to breathe of like, this is not as it was before, potentially. And if it is, I'm an adult now. I have a different voice. I can speak up to this person, especially my favorite thing to do, because it makes, this is probably not the most therapist thing of me, but it's going to come out anyway, that it makes people realize like, no, you're being an asshole. Like when people make an inappropriate or other deprecating comment, what I ask people to do is the person who is receiving it, be still faced and ask the person to repeat themselves. And then they're like, oh, the thing, it's like, I'm still not getting it. What's funny about that? And then it makes them realize like, probably not the move. And
Ooh.
it's an assertive way for them to have their own self-reflection without you having to access in person. If you feel hurt and you want to cry and process separate, go, please do that. Like, don't shove that down. But it's a way for you to keep yourself safe and have that reaction to yourself, either, right then you excuse yourself or later, and put that person in check. That's my favorite thing to do because my specialization is confidence and assertiveness. And I'm not on the big 5 personality traits, I'm not a very agreeable person, which is like, go with the flow, people pleasing. I'm like 30%. So I'm far more disagreeable. I'm more abrasive. I'm obviously like funny and relatable, but that comes out more when I don't like how I'm being treated, or I encourage others to vocalize if they don't like it. So if you're the recipient of other deprecating humor and you're more sensitive, understandably, because there's a history, whether it's in your family feeling outcast or teased, where it's by others. Sometimes, unfortunately, people have both, where they felt like the black sheep of both their friend group and their family, and they didn't have any solace, maybe until adulthood when they went to therapy, that there's a voice that we can access when that switch gets flipped and go, I'm not okay with that. And here's why. I have a history with that being used against me. And if you want our friendship or our relationship to continue, what you said can never come out of your mouth again. And everybody can word it how they will. I'm, again, abrasive. So that's my comfort level. But if people, ratchet it up with niceness from there, if you will, but that's like the base of what you're trying to convey. And that's also in sessions that I have when couples will cross the line. I lean in and I say, I try to give them the benefit of the doubt. I think you were trying to say that as a joke to lighten the mood because you feel uncomfortable. However, that is not how it landed for your partner. And that's what we need to tend to right now. Can you look at them eye to eye and tell me what you think they're feeling? And they will sit with it and be like, ooh, I messed up. Only some couple, I've worked with like really high conflict couples. So they're like, I don't care. And I'm like, well, that's a whole other path that we're going down. And if you're with somebody, I actually did work on this with a couple once where one of the members of the couple grew up with joshing each other, teasing each other. Like they riffed all the time. It was a bunch of boys. So that was their communication style culturally. And they were, I think, like from on Long Island or the Bronx, like very rough and tumble. And the other partner was not from there, was very sensitive. And the family never really had levity at all, let alone joshing or razzing each other. So love language, right? the member of the couple who used humor was trying to love, the member of the couple that didn't use humor, and it was landing as teasing and bullying. And I believe in the heart of hearts, the humorous partner really was that intent. It's not about the intent, it's how it lands. It's the impact, not the intention. So when you're looking at the impact, that's the material clinically. And that's, if you're listening to this, that's the material that you bring up to your partner. I want humor in our relationship. I know that's important to you. It's important to me. And I need you to know when you use the humor style you were raised with, it lands for me like bullying, like teasing, and like you don't love me. Is that what you want it to land as? Is that your intent? Oh my gosh, no, that's not it. Then we're getting somewhere. So it really is important to decipher, where does this come from? And you can learn a lot about this from observing how the people you're around, if you have a chance to. Romantic relationships are probably the easiest way to do this, or like childhood friends. How do they interact with their family? Or have you ever heard somebody on the phone with their parents or their sibling or whatever? They tell you stories, about like, oh, and I was telling, oh, you're such a dumb, blah, blah, blah. It's like, that's funny to you? Like, that's just not my style of humor. There's multiple different styles. Try to find somebody similar to your style of humor, because that's an easier road, that you're not then fighting to be like the funny one when one of you is gently bullying the other and the other one is just, razzing a little bit. You have to get on the same page.
Yeah. And let me say, as someone who is very high on the agreeableness and people pleasing side of the spectrum, initiating that conversation, both in my marriage and in my close friendships,
Yeah.
it took me a really long time to be able to communicate that. But what I have found is that when you have that conversation in like a non accusatory way and are just really honest about how it lands with you,
Mm-hmm.
the people, like your people, will adjust their humor so as not to hurt you.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, that doesn't mean that there's no humor. It doesn't mean that
Right.
there's no joking. It doesn't even mean that like you can't make like a little good-natured jab at me. It's about
At the right time.
at the right time and with the right intent. But
Mm-hmm.
it's about getting on the same page as to like what you are putting out, you may think is one thing, but I am receiving it as another. So let's get on the same page so that the way we communicate and the way we exchange humor, we're not accidentally hurting each other and pushing the other away when we're trying to pull the other in.
And if you're the only one laughing, chances are it's not funny. Like, it's not as funny as you thought. And there's caveats, obviously, if you're trying out a stand-up joke and you know how you want it to land, so you're laughing to yourself, or it's based on a story that was really funny, you just had to be there kind of a thing. Those are the aside. If I'm trying to josh you or make a joke on your behalf, quote unquote, but it's really at your expense, then there's an ownership of the person who tried to land the joke to be like, can I re-land the plane? I'm so sorry, that was not my intent. I apologize. What my ultimate impact was is that I wanted you to lighten up, because you're so serious about this and you're such an intense person. It's just not how it has to be. And if you can get to that level of awareness, then the friendship, like you said, or the relationship can continue. And that's the goal of most of the time when we either avoid conflict or try to face conflict head on. We do it because we want to feel seen, known, heard, accepted, and loved by whoever we're trying to broach that with. And ideally, we want the relationship to continue, or we're trying to set a boundary of, because it's happened so much and I've asked you not to do it, I don't feel safe anymore. This isn't funny to me. It will never be funny to me. And if the jokes don't stop about it, we're done. Like, there needs to be a level of seriousness also, but we can try to be lighthearted and ask the intent or the impact. And I would say 8 out of 10 times, barring some outliers, most people are understanding and are able to receive if you word it in a intentionally kind, not nice. Kind is telling people what they need to hear, even if it's uncomfortable. Nice is just telling people what they want to hear. If you word it in a kind way and they want the relationship to continue, that will be the outcome.
Mm-hmm.
If you're finding, and I had to go through this with my partner too, his family, they tease each other, they kind of, in a loving way, whatever they say behind the person's back also gets said to their face. So it's not like they have a whole different experience, but they're like, oh, there's that member of the family and that thing they do. And they'll say it behind and in front of, it's not to collude as much, but it didn't sit well with me because I have a history with bullying and what have you. And there was one time that it was taken too far. And I knew to not do it right then, but I like banked it. And on the drive home, I was like, we need to talk. He was like, oh no. And I was like, it crossed a level for me where I don't even feel like you respect me as not only a partner, as a person. And I really hope, because the rest of this car ride's going to go very differently if you say whatever answer to this, I hope that wasn't your intent. I'm sorry, that's the way my family. I said, I get that. I'm not asking you to change how you are with your family. I'm asking you to change how you are with me because we're a different family now. And that's not the tone I'm going to set with you. And I'm very, like, again, I can be very stern, and I'm not everybody's cup of whiskey. I'm not an easy partner to be with by any means, but I am in a lot of other ways because I'm lighthearted. I'm funny. I can take a joke. Like this morning, he was texting me something and I made a joke and he was like, oh, it wasn't that. It was this. And I was like, relax. I'm messing with you. He's like, I'm just not used to you joking with me this early in the morning. And I was like, well, next time I'll just throw a lamp at you so you can lighten up faster. And he was like, haha. Like it's that kind of stuff that knowing I can be intense in these ways, but lighthearted in these ways makes the balance so that I can make those requests in my relationship and friendships. Here's what's on limits. Here's what's off limits. And here's what's going to happen if it goes this way or that way is a gift that you give to others. And knowing your own personal level with humor, and can you expand it in the ways that feel safe and contract it in the ways that don't feel safe and set limits, allows you to have a more expressive and expansive relationship in or out of therapy, really.
And being able and willing to foster that conversation about the different types of humor, what an effective way to get unstuck. Because if you're on different pages and you're both trying to be funny and you're actually being hurtful, that's a one-way ticket to
Right.
feeling stuck in your relationship. You said it's kind, but can feel uncomfortable. Being able to have that conversation and communicate your needs around humor, like such an effective tool for moving forward in your relationship.
And the most, I would say, depending on what article you look at, there's many different types of humor. For the ones that come up the most in therapy and relationally, it would be like self-deprecation, we already talked about, or other deprecation. There's observational humor, kind of making funny observations or connections. And then there's the quick wit humor, making certain kinds of jokes or connections in terms of it being like the quick thinking. So in a relationship, when you're wanting to further the bond and learn what kind of humor the person has, start with something that's more observational rather than character trait based, like you were saying. It's probably not funny to them unless you hear, if they make the invitation based on self-deprecation that this is okay to joke about, sometimes it's still not. And it's the thing with siblings. It's like, no, only I get to bully my sibling. You don't get to, like, you would get protective over whatever the person or topic is. It's, again, it's an art and a science. It's nuanced. Land with some wit, land with some observation, land with a little self-deprecation. And once you've laid the groundwork, being able to gently josh or razz or tease with the kind intent of your partner to lighten the mood can land well. But it's usually, you have to know somebody, again, same with therapy, you have to know somebody in a certain way for a longer period of time to almost guarantee that it's going to land well. And then there's moods. You have to be in the mood to have sex. You have to be in the mood to joke. You have to be in the mood to be serious. There's moods that we also need to attune to, both in therapy and in our relationships and friendships. Sometimes it's a great joke. It's just not the right time because the person's not in the mood. Get a temperature check first to see if they're in the mood to joke about it.
These are such helpful tips in navigating humor in relationship to others. And I'm also curious, when we are feeling stuck personally, so me, I'm feeling stuck in my life. Maybe I lack forward momentum in my job, or I don't know creatively what I want to work on, or I'm feeling like I can't motivate myself to do the things that I want and need to do. When I'm in that place, how can I use humor to help push myself in the right direction and help to propel myself forward?
Two ways of doing it. One, using observational humor, is what around you could be humorous. No matter how many times I try to have this, whatever this type of job I want, let's say I want to go for a sales job, and you're like, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on this, I'm marketing. And then all the jobs that you're getting are like veterinary medicine or whatever, that totally offshoot. That's an opportunity to laugh at yourself of like, does the universe think I should be a vet? Like, what the hell is going on? Like, here's my view. I want this. Why am I being served this? And then once the humor comes in, then you can be curious and go, oh, have I ever really considered that? Or what, obviously, like, there's targeted ads now because of AI and everything else. Like, what am I talking about that maybe this thing does know more than I do? Like, it's reframing, what are you being served that you didn't order from the universe, and trying to fill in the gap with humor. And when you're looking at other ways, so that's like one way, is looking observationally. And then the other way to do it is looking at it like you are a character in a movie, and there's somebody, either two parts, there's somebody else controlling the script and you have no choice but to laugh, and it's like improv at that point where you're just like running through your lines and you don't know what they are, you're just somebody serving you something, you got to improv back. Or that you're in control of the script and you could write in more levity, you could write in more humor, and you can have an opportunity to laugh at yourself more so it doesn't feel uncomfortable to be stuck. You have to have radical acceptance. Sometimes we're stuck. Sometimes we're not what we want, especially in, I'm a parent, especially in parenting, that she's young. There's a lot of times where I am stuck. I'm literally sometimes nap trapped. Like earlier this morning, I had an interview and she was sleeping on me. And I'm like, well, we got to just roll with it. There's the improv part, right? I don't know who's scripting this, but this is hysterical. And you just can't control it. So it's being able to laugh and have radical acceptance. Sometimes you're stuck. It doesn't matter how you feel about it. And sometimes no matter how you feel about it, you're going to stay stuck regardless. So the reframe can be, how can I get through this stuck season with some levity? Can I, instead of doom scrolling, how to get unstuck, how to this, whatever, can I go watch a stand-up show? Can I go watch a comedy? Can I look at other people's creative brain material to get myself out of this and not put it all on me? That we are responsible for ourselves, but we're not responsible in this way for every single thing that ever could go wrong. Like that's just too much to manage. So let other people's humor infuse you when you might not have it yourself.
Ugh, you are like speaking my story. I was, like the rest of the world, experienced a very large season of stuck during COVID and kind of the transition back to quote unquote normal life following COVID. And it was a really hard transition for me. And I felt very down and very anxious and very stuck. And I just threw myself into stand up. I watched stand up
Mm-hmm.
almost every night for months and months and months. And that ability to laugh during that hour-long stand-up and being able to reconnect with joy, that then started to spill over into the rest of my life. I was able to laugh more at other things. I was able to feel more joy as I move through my day. And I credit those comedians at helping to pull me out of a really dark place.
And being able to recognize that it's your state of being stuck sometimes is self-perceived, and if another were in your position they wouldn't be stuck. So that's very meta existential therapy view there. And other times, no matter who is in that position, they would feel stuck and be stuck, and COVID is a great example of that. There was ordinances, whether people follow them or not, that's not for my commenting. There were certain general rules we should have followed that we weren't, or some of us were, and then angry at others for not, that it's like we all were stuck. And if our business was closed, we were stuck. If this was closed, if we couldn't leave, if we couldn't see our family, like we had a general communal sense in some of those, maybe not all of them, but in some of those of stuckness, that we had to develop other coping skills. And in my view as a therapist, my business was never better than during COVID, because people realized like, oh, this is not and it, by the way, is not healthy to be around that many people or your family 24/7. Like there's hobbies and outlets for a reason, and it caused a lot of problems. So again, my business was doing very well during that time, but it was because of a very tough time for a lot of people. And in the same vein, when people were able to look at, oh, there are other ways and other coping skills that I am now being forced almost to learn. The bars are closed down, the gym, the this. What are you going to do with it? It's closed down for all of us. Are you going to go outside and be active, or are you going to hole yourself up and order Drizzly or whatever was open at that time and just be an alcoholic? Like I would use that kind of like almost dark, morbid humor when I was working with clients of like, look, we're all in this together, right? What is that, High School Musical? And I would sing it sometimes, like, we're all
in this together.
Yeah. I was like, not to be, I've never seen it, but I was like, not to be Troy Bolton here, but like, we're all in this together. So what do you want to do with this?
Mm-hmm.
If this lasts for the year, what do you want to look back on this year and say that you did with your life? Do you want to do something productive, or do you want to be a degenerate? And again, tough love, that usually would make them laugh, and they're like, okay, I don't want to be a degenerate. I'm like, that's just not going to be a good vibe on dating apps in the future. Like the world will open up. Let's not be so bleak. So I would use that kind of humor too. And I think it's important to touch on that, because to touch on feeling the communal sense of stuck, because when we're looking at humor, there's kind of a communal definition. It's not always accurate, but I think operational definitions are important, that when we're looking at like irony versus satire versus sarcasm, when we're talking about some of those different types of humor, irony is about a certain situation. but satire and sarcasm are forms of expression. So we have to make that happen, whereas irony is just existing. So it's like if the day before the world shut down, that was the day you signed up for a gym membership, you did all this stuff to better meal prep, all this better yourself, and the next day the world shut down, that would be a time where you're like, that's ironic. Like, that's really fun. Again, I didn't cause that. It's an irony that I have to laugh at. Whereas, again, satire or sarcasm, everybody has their own feelings about sarcasm because it kind of translates into cutting the skin, and which is it's designed, like sarcastic humor is designed to hurt a little bit. But again, much like every pain that feels good, you have to consent to it. So it's like kind of a BDSM relationship with humor. You need to make sure the person you're doing it to also likes what you're doing to them. Otherwise, it's just sadistic or masochistic.
I love all of those examples. I love kind of your humorous approach towards like a really, really hard thing that we were all experiencing and how that kind of helped people laugh their way out of it. Talia, this conversation has been so fantastic. I feel like we have talked through so many helpful tips on like how to leverage humor to not only get ourselves from stuck to unstuck, but also just improve our relationships with other people, with ourselves. So thank you for all of those insights. Here at Season of Stuck, as we near the end of the interview, we like to jump into a few kind of final questions. Cool. So if it's okay with you, I just have a few more questions for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So question 1, thinking about like the future version of yourself, like your ideal future Talia.
Yes.
If she could travel back in time and talk to the current version of you, what advice do you think she would give you on how to navigate stuckness at this point of your life?
That is a very profound question. I think future me, right? Future me is giving current me advice.
Yep.
Future me would give current me the advice that my dad gave younger me. So all very meta, that it's not as serious as it feels, and it's okay that it feels so serious now. However, it's a season. And that's something that I'm working on with my therapist because I have a baby. She's under a year old. And it was not a talk about irony. I didn't think I could get pregnant. And then I got surprise pregnant. So it was all very quick, unplanned, not unwanted, because obviously I was doing the math to see if I could. And then I was like, I started therapy for grief counseling for not being able to get pregnant. And then all of a sudden it was like, just kidding, actually. We just needed to take you from agony to ecstasy. But that was a mind mess for a lot of the time because not only was it like, I didn't think it could ever happen. Now it's happening faster than I ever would have imagined. And what that meant for my identities as a therapist, as a coach, as a business owner, as a not single, but like I wasn't responsible for another human life besides for another competent adult partner. Like it just was so much at once that future me would go back and give current me advice of like, you wouldn't have done it if it would have happened any other way. Because I'm so structured and so planned, I'm much more lighthearted now. I would have never chosen to quote unquote blow up my life in a way. And now that the dust has settled, I'm like, I needed that explosion. So I think future me would come back and say, it's all going to work out, even if it's not the way that you had planned it. Again, LOL, that you like the thing that was probably should have been the most planned was the most unplanned, and the irony of that. And that was the catalyst for lightening up, for being so much different and understanding that sometimes the best things in your life are not what you plan at all. So don't get so stuck on what you plan because it can really close you off to some of the best opportunities that you could ever have.
Future Talia, what incredible advice. I'm going to stick that in my pocket right here. Seriously.
So
she is like Zen. I am just going to go to the mountain to get more advice from her.
Like a psyche Sherpa. She's very smart.
I'm very like here for that advice. Okay, the next few questions are like a lightning round kind of format. So I'm just going to ask you a question. You say the first thing that comes to mind.
Got it.
Favorite movie of all time?
21 and 22 Jump Street.
Those are such good ones. Okay, go-to coffee order.
When I go to Starbucks, like the brown sugar shaken espresso, and there's this place called Coffee Dose around here, and it's called the Goldie, which is like a turmeric latte. So those would be my go-tos.
Turmeric lattes, surprisingly delicious.
Yes. They move through you very quickly, though, so be near a bathroom, but very delicious.
Noted.
Yeah.
If you could have any animal in the world as a pet, what animal would it be?
Oh, I love animals. I have a dog. What would it be? Barring its own mammalian nature, I would like maybe like a pet bear or a pet lion, like a big, fuzzy, fluffy, but without the
Yep.
risk of it killing me.
Yep. So like bear/lion minus the mauling potential.
Yeah, like I want it to be a living stuffed animal, like Ted, but not as, yeah.
Not as vulgar, but as cute.
Yes, exactly.
Amazing. Okay, last question. And I am going to change this one up based on the content of our conversation.
Okay.
Who's your favorite stand-up comedian?
Ooh.
I know that's a loaded question for someone who is into comedy.
I appreciate Taylor Tomlinson because I think she highlights the type of humor that I like very well, and she exemplifies it perfectly. I also like Nate Bargatze because he has like kind of the deadpan, well-timed humor. So I would have to say those are my top two. I'm sure if had I had prep for this, I would have had a more long-winded answer, but off the cuff, those are the first ones that I can think of that I'm like, I would rewatch their special or go see them live. And I also like Jared Freed. He's one of the co-hosts of the U Up podcast. He had a Netflix special. Some of the jokes, it's like very relatable. So I like relatable humor also.
I just saw Taylor in October. She was incredible. One of my favorite stand-up
Excellent.
shows I've ever seen. And I'm going to throw two of my favorites in the mix, which is John Mulaney.
Oh, I forgot. Yes. Oh, his newest special is hysterical.
Baby J.
The way he frames addiction, phenomenal.
I literal tears crying from watching that, just of complete laughter. I love Mulaney so much. I just saw him at the Hollywood Bowl last month, and it was like one of the best nights ever. And Mae Martin, host of the Handsome Pod, and they have a few different stand-up specials on Netflix. Talk about relatable humor. Just everything they say, I just feel like, yes, me too. I get it.
Yes.
So, well, great. Jacob Freed, you said?
Jared Freed.
Jared Freed. I have never checked him out, so I will have to give him a watch.
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. Talia, thank you so much for being here. If someone listening wants to learn more about you, your work, check out your podcast, how do they do that?
So my main page that I'm active on, like personally, I'm on all the platforms with my name at Talia Bombola. I'm at most active on Instagram. Like if you send a message, you'll actually get a response. Well, depending on what you send. Depending on what you send, you will get a real response. And I do Q&As. So that's on Instagram at Talia Bombola. And then my podcasts are linked on there. One of them is Heal Through Humor. The other one is Between Two Clinicians. And then if people are interested in either therapy, if you live in the state of California, or coaching, if you live worldwide, for help with your life, your relationships, or your business, that's taliabombola.com. And I have a course called Rewire Your Relationships. So the website, even the humor, is rewireyourrelationships.help. Because I thought it was funny when people like, help. Like it's like the little wasabi girl meme where she eats it and she goes, help. Because that's how most people feel. So if you want to learn more about yourself and have a better relationship with yourself so you can have a better relationship with other people, learn why you do what you do, why you attract who you are attracted to and who's attracted to you, and basically everything of the origins of you, I recommend taking that class. It's like everything I've learned in the 10 to 15 years I've done this personally and professionally, all in one neat little package with humor. So that's an added touch.
Amazing. So many great ways to connect. Talia, thank you again for being here. You have inspired me to go watch some stand-up. And yeah, thank you again.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
That's it for today. A huge thank you to our guests for their incredible insights, and a huge thank you to you, our listeners. We know that there are so many podcasts out there to choose from, and we are just so grateful that you chose ours. If you enjoyed today's episode, consider recommending the podcast to a friend or family member that you think would enjoy it. And to make sure that you never miss an episode, subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever it is you get your podcasts. And while you're there, if you loved the show, please consider leaving a 5-star review. It plays such a huge part in getting this podcast out to a wider audience and ultimately supporting more people on their journey from stuck to unstuck. And to keep in touch and access even more stuck-related content, follow us on Instagram at Season of Stuck and visit our website, seasonofstuck.com, where you can sign up to get episodes delivered directly to your inbox. Thank you again for being here. It is so, so appreciated. Until next time, I'm Deanna deBara, and you're listening to Season of Stuck.